Welcome to Right Minded with Matt Curran. I'm your host. You guessed it correctly, Matt Curran. Email if you want to be on the podcast for any comments, concerns, theological insights, questions even. rightmindedpodcast@gmail.com. And by the way, folks, don't forget to give us 5 stars. We need those. Those show for other folks that they need to come listen to Right Minded with Matt Curran. And I just have to say, another prediction of mine came true. Liz Cheney will have a primary challenge in Wyoming. Now, this prediction came a little bit sooner than I expected, because how it works in Washington and these campaigns is this. So you get sworn in January 3rd or whatever, and then in the summer of this year is when candidates who want to challenge people, both primary, general election, opposite party, that's when they start fundraising. That's when they start putting committees out to just sort of test the waters and see what the heck happens. And donors approach you, or party recruits, they approach you, and they see what, if you're interested in all that stuff. By December, November, you make a hard decision if you're going to run in the primary. That's why around December, that's why towards the end of this year, you'll start seeing congressmen. We'll start to find out who's going to retire, who's not. So Liz Cheney has a primary challenge, which ought to tell you something. And by the way, the Wyoming GOP doesn't even support her. They want to censure her. They're finding every which way in the Wyoming playbook or law book, which have you, to find a way to get her out of there. They're trying to find a way to recall her. And now I don't know if you can recall a federal official, but they're going to try. They're censoring her, which tells you one thing. Donald Trump has a hold, and a better hold, of the Wyoming GOP folks, and the people of Wyoming support Donald Trump more than they do Dick Cheney and the Cheney family out there that has been a legacy and a dynasty in Wyoming. That ought to tell you something. And it also gives me another prediction that came true, which, by the way, you know what I ought to do? I ought to take my predictions from previous episodes and play them as clips on these kind of episodes when they come true. So this way, you're not just taking my word for it. And you know, I ought to do that. I'm going to write that down. Next time a prediction of mine comes true, I will go back. I will get the clip of me saying it, and I will play it as a clip to remind you. And then I will elaborate on my prediction being correct, and what I meant at the time, what it means now. Because I think that's very, very important. You know, it often bothers me. You ever notice, you know, on these TV channels, they'll sit around and they'll interview somebody, and they'll say, "What did you think about the president's comments about this?" And they'll talk about it after some sort of big interview. Well, why don't they invite the president onto the panel and they can talk about what he said? I think that would be fascinating. But anyway, my prediction comes true yet again. I will play those clips on there next time they come true. So what we have on the agenda, we got another episode of Curran's Corner. I've gotten so many emails, and I invited one of these folks. His name's Blanton, to come onto the program. He's from Clemson, South Carolina area. I invited him to come onto the program, and it's pre-recorded. We recorded it about 30 minutes ago. We'll throw it in here. We'll let you know, and it's all about the cultural, Christian founding sort of stuff, God in schools, God in government in general, discussion. So you'll hear some of that. And then after that, we'll talk about the Biden quote-unquote unity message that's being floating around, the Biden unity message. Oh, and can I say one more thing about impeachment? I know I'm jumping all around here. Going back to the Liz Cheney impeachment, another thing that I was right about. See, I'm right about so many things, I can't even write them all down. I jumped to the 2 other things I was right about with the Murkowski and Cheney thing. I forgot to tell you about this thing I was right about. This is why it's important that I go back and get those clips and play them, because I need to remind myself about how right I am. So this impeachment is about the future of politics. Whether it's going to be restoring order, whether Donald Trump's going to start a third party, he's going to run in 2024 as a Republican, whether he's going to get primary challengers all around the country, he's going to seek revenge on certain Democrats, primary, certain Republicans. It's all unfolding now. What the Senate does with this will determine the future, not of just the Republican Party, but politics as we know it. And do not doubt me. If they convict Trump, third party on its way. And a lot of people think that'll dominate Democrats down the future. It could for a while. But if you get Trump party and Republican party together, they could caucus together and make a mega party to outdo the Democrats and for a power grab. So there's always that possibility. All right, so the next segment is up here. Thank you. I appreciate it. I got to give myself applause. We're still in this virus days. We're in the virus days. Again, if it's good for Ron this weekend, if it's good for Tom Brady this weekend, if it's good for Patrick Mahomes and whoever the hell the Buffalo Bills quarterback's name is, I don't even know his name. If it's good for them to walk up to a Jumbotron and get fake applause every time they get a touchdown, then it's good enough for me. And if it's good for Joe Biden even after an inauguration, one of the best quote-unquote speeches we've ever heard in our lifetime, that the media and everybody's just fanning over, then if it's good enough for him over one of the best speeches ever to go to a virtual screen and get applause that way, then it's good enough for us here at Curran's Corner. So, again, it was pre-recorded. Here's the clip from Blanton of the Clemens, or I keep saying Clemens. It's Clemson. Blanton of Clemson, South Carolina. Here with us today. Here is the clip. Welcome, everybody, to Curran's Corner. We had a couple of emails come in relative to culture, separation of church and state, the founding of Christianity, and one of them that stuck out to me, and he was very passionate about it, was Blanton Stammy, and we have Blanton with us here today. So welcome, Blanton, to Right Minded with Matt Curran. Hi.
Thank you, Matt. I've been listening really since the first episode you put out. Really enjoy the content so far, so thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure. So why don't you go ahead and explain to my listeners here your perspective, because you obviously disagree with me, your perspective on all of this.
Well, there's no real major disagreements, but I would say that I have a few things I could probably add to the statement that you made in episode 8, which was the last episode you did, about how the U.S. was kind of founded on Christian principles. While I think that's probably true to a point, since obviously people were fleeing religious persecution from England, there are a few quotes that actually stuck out to me from some of the founding fathers. So this is from James Madison. The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries. Another one from John Adams. The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. So I found these two quotes pretty interesting, and I know many of the founding fathers, like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson to a point, were almost deists, where they believed that there was a God or some higher power that created the universe, but they weren't necessarily subscribers to the Christian religion in the mainstream form we know today. Also, a couple other points that I find interesting that kind of points to me that maybe the U.S. isn't as much of a Christian religion as some may think, is the fact that in God we trust that appears on the currency today wasn't even added until 1956. And
by the Knights of Columbus.
Oh my goodness. You scared me there. And under God was incorporated in the Pledge of Allegiance on June 14th, 1954. Whereas I think a lot of people probably believe, or at least kind of assume, that these things have been commonplace on our currency and in our pledge for a long time. Those were more added in, I guess, what would be the Cold War era. So just want to find that interesting, and maybe share your thoughts on, what you think about that.
Sure. So I would say, like I mentioned in episode 8, that we are totally founded on a Christian nation. The whole separation of church and state only became relevant to us in modern time when the Supreme Court seized it in 1947 over prayer in school. And they took the Thomas Jefferson letter of separation of church and state totally out of context when Thomas Jefferson was writing to a Baptist association that was worried about George Washington, John Adams giving these national holidays, these national days of fasting, Christian principles. And Thomas Jefferson wrote to them saying that the First Amendment protects them from this, that they don't have to participate in this. It's more of an asking thing. And that's when he talked about the separation of church and state. The First Amendment, which, by the way, separation of church and state is not anywhere in the Constitution. The only times religion is mentioned in the Constitution is that there is a religious test that cannot be applied by any state, and the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment that no government can establish a religion. But Thomas Jefferson writes in this letter, however, that the First Amendment doesn't prohibit a government, an individual working for the government, or anybody from expressing their cultural, their religious beliefs. Meaning, as long as they're not forcing somebody to do something, we can make the argument on the prayer thing. But as long as they're not forcing people, say, you have to go to church, this particular church on Sunday, they can express it. That's why President Grant gives Christmas Day off, and every president since has talked about Almighty God, including Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. here in his inauguration speech talked about God. Every president has. And so, and what's most fascinating is after Thomas Jefferson gave that letter about quote-unquote separation of church and state, which was misinterpreted, in my opinion, in 1947 Supreme Court case, he goes to what? 2 days later, he goes to church in the House of Representatives. They having a church service on the House floor. A Christian principle, a Christian service on the House floor. They use those chambers for services. You also you mentioned fleeing religious persecution, and then I'll shut up. I'll yield the floor to you. I've got so much to say, but I realize I'm taking up a lot of the time. Religious persecution. The colonies, yes, they came away. And they separated the colonies by religion. Catholics had Maryland, which it's in the name, Mary's Land. Quakers had Pennsylvania. I think it's from Virginia to South Carolina. I don't know about Georgia. It's the Church of England. And then Anglicans were like up in Rhode Island. They separated. And so once the Revolutionary War was over, that's where we came to this religious test, okay, where if you were going to move to another state, if Church of Englandite, I don't know what they're called, down in North Carolina wants to move up to an Anglican church in Rhode Island, he cannot be barred from serving. Okay, but you can still express your opinion. So I'll yield the floor to you, Blaine.
Well, a couple things that maybe I'll ask you. I know you're turning the floor to me, but I might have some more questions now after your response.
Sure.
So I would say, first thing, as far as the country being founded on Christian principles, how many laws made its way from the 10 Commandments to the U.S. law book? Out of 10, how many appeared or still appear in our laws today?
Well, that's an interesting question because not even all Christians agree on the numbering or the interpretation of the Ten Commandments. Because, you see, you have the religion Christian, but then what I tried to express here was you have subsets of Christianity here in the United States. You've got Catholics, Quakers, Episcopalians, what have you. They don't that the whole point was we were founded on a general Christian principle, but not all Christians even believe on the differences of the Ten Commandments. So we weren't going to put anything like that through Congress because you clearly had Christians not liking one another is my main point, Blanton.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. I would say, though, at least with the in God we trust on money, I personally don't have a problem with it at all. But as far as the principle goes, I do kind of find it odd because if, for example, Muslims had or asked for in Allah we trust, I feel like that wouldn't go over well with most of America. And I feel like it's almost no different, really. To me, at least putting that on the money favors a religion because I think everyone knows what God means in God we trust or in the Pledge of Allegiance when it says one nation under God. Now, again, I'm not trying to act like a senile agnostic person that's mad or feels oppressed. That's not how I want to come off, but it's more so the principle of it. And I feel like if the tables were turned, the mainstream right and maybe the more conservative Christian sector of political views would kind of have it.
Sure. I would say the term "in God we trust," let me ask you, is it forcing anybody to go to a church service? Is it forcing anybody to